The game of Unrivaled. That's all I'm going to say. This was the game of Unrivaled between the Paige Bueckers led Breeze team and the Chelsea Gray led Rose. Chelsea Gray went full magnet ball, 37 points, did not hit the game winner.
That right there is what happens when a player gets put in absolute hell. 37 points from Chelsea Gray, nearly breaking the Unrivaled scoring record, and yet that's not the performance everyone's talking about. Because while Chelsea Gray was going full Mamba mode on offense, something else was happening on the other end of the court that has people completely reevaluating what defensive value looks like in a 3-on-3 setting.
Sees Kawhi Leonard come back on. He's like, that was Paige Bueckers when she saw Lexie Hall come back on. Because Paige Bueckers, anytime she saw Shook Sutton on the floor, it was, I'm getting mine. I'm going in, I'm cooking. And she fucking cooked Shook Sutton. Lexie Hall steps foot on the floor. Paige Bueckers, at one stage, Paige had 5 assists to 4 turnovers. And in the end, she had 4 assists to no turnovers to end the game. Mostly because she decided when Shook Sutton was on the floor, it was easy. And it was the way.
Watch that sequence again. Every single time Paige Bueckers saw Shook Sutton check into the game, it was attack mode. 15 points, 9 rebounds, 9 assists, nearly a triple-double. But here's what the box score doesn't tell you. When Lexie Hall was on the floor, Paige went from 4 assists and 0 turnovers in stretches to 5 assists and 4 turnovers overall. That's not a coincidence. That's one defender systematically dismantling another player's entire offensive rhythm. The LeBron meme comparison is perfect. Paige literally hunted mismatches like a veteran. She saw Shook Sutton, she attacked, she saw Lexie Hall step on the court, and suddenly every decision became harder. Every pass became riskier. Every screen came with the threat of a deflection.
Quickest player in the world. So they're the type, Paige is the type of player Lexie Hall can absolutely guard. Lexie Hall struggles guarding, for example, the Ryan Howards of the world. I'm trying to think. She's someone bigger than her, obviously. The quick point guards. Paige isn't that. Paige is going to beat you crafty-wise, and using screens, she's going to manipulate the defense. Paige, I thought Paige's passing has been very, very good and Unrivaled. With the extra space she's making, and she's taking some more risks, but like, she was getting blitzed on double teams, and Lexie was recovering past the blitz.
Now here's what makes this so fascinating from a tactical standpoint. Paige Bueckers isn't some speed demon point guard that Lexie can just stay in front of. She's crafty. She manipulates defenses with screens. She beats you with basketball IQ, not pure athleticism. That's exactly the type of player Lexie Hall is built to guard. Ryan Howard types. The explosive athletes who can blow by you. That's where Lexie struggles. But a methodical, screen-heavy guard like Paige, that's Lexie's laboratory. And the recovery speed after blitzes was absurd. They'd send double teams at Paige. She'd make the right read, and somehow Lexie would recover past the blitz and still be there to contest or tip the ball. There were multiple possessions where Paige was getting the inbound, turning around, and Lexie was just there, materializing out of nowhere to deflect the pass.
She's just there and tips the ball away. Like, there's a couple of those turnovers where it was like, where they happened, but they didn't deem, they gave him as an offensive rebound for Lexie Hall. I think it was 2 offensive rebounds Lexie Hall got that were both like, well, one of her offensive rebounds anyway, I thought almost should have been a steal and a turnover, but it doesn't really matter. Fuck the box score. At the end of the day, the box score doesn't matter. She also hit the biggest shot of the game. She was horrendous from 3. Absolutely horrific from 3. And then hit the biggest shot of the game to put them on a game winner. Like, Lexie Hall did everything you wanted a player to do. Just, can we get some offense? And this is the annoying thing about
the offensive rebounds that got credited to Lexie in the box score. At least one of those should have been a steal and turnover. She tipped balls away on inbounds that somehow got classified differently. But forget the stat sheet for a second, because what Lexie did goes beyond traditional metrics. She was horrific from 3-point range all game. Absolutely brutal shooting performance. And then when it mattered most, she hit the biggest shot of the game to put Rose up for the win. That's the Lexie Hall paradox in a nutshell. She'll frustrate you with her offensive limitations for 38 minutes, then make the one play that decides the outcome.
Lexie is that. You watch Lexie Hall and she shows you why she is pretty much irreplaceable. But she also shows you why there are times where you can't offer her a max contract. And I have this scary feeling a team's going to be dumb as fuck and offer her a max contract. Like, this was This is welcome to Hull Island, Paige Bueckers. Like, that is just one of those things where I'm like, we all talk about the players that Lexie Hull just has in hell. And like Lexie Hull, I don't think Lexie Hull necessarily is, again, she's this unbelievable stopper. But like, she literally makes players second guess every pass they throw, second guess every screen they come off, second guess when they...
This is the conversation that makes Lexie Hull such a nightmare to evaluate for front offices. There are moments where you watch her play and think she's absolutely irreplaceable. The hustle, the deflections, the way she makes elite offensive players second guess everything they do. And then there are stretches where the offensive limitations are so glaring that you wonder if you can really justify a max contract. The scary part, some team is going to offer her that max deal because what she does is so rare, so unique, that a general manager is going to convince themselves they can build around her defensive impact. The question is whether that team understands what they're actually getting, or if they're overvaluing individual performances like this one.
The Alvarado shit, where she just second guesses, they have second guess turning around, because she might just be there to tip the ball away. If you switch off for a split second, she's got an offensive rebound. It is all the hustle plays. And in fairness, I haven't seen a player look as much in hell in a 3-on-3 setting as Paige did with Lexie on her. And also, fair play to Chelsea Gray, Shakira Austin, Azare, whoever else was on the floor with her. But like, we saw, a lot of people were like, oh, there's no reason she should be starting and instead of going double bigs. You saw why Nola Henry plays her. Like, today, you saw why Nola Henry plays her, honestly. Like, this is...
Let's talk about the viral moment that preceded this game. The Dunker Spot podcast was discussing the matchup. Someone said Lexie Hull could guard Paige, and there was this awkward silence. Then a tweet went semi-viral pointing out that silence, interpreting it as doubt that Lexie had any chance of slowing Paige down. That tweet aged like milk left in the desert sun. Paige Bueckers is going to have PTSD from this game. That's not hyperbole. The constant turning around and seeing Lexie right there, the deflections, the way Lexie made every possession feel like a minefield. That's the kind of defensive performance that stays with an offensive player. And remember, Paige was cooking when Lexie wasn't on the floor. This wasn't a bad offensive game from Paige overall. This was a tale of two matchups.
This was one of those performances where you're just like, shit. Like, this is why Lexie Hull is such a tough player to almost evaluate. Because at the end of the day, it's she's somebody that is just really, really good at basketball. And the little things that Lexie Hull does is like, you just can't replace that. And that's the annoying thing is that it's going to be scary. It's going to be tough to afford to keep Lexie Hull on this team and to keep Sophie Cunningham on this team.
Here's where the Sophie Cunningham situation becomes relevant. Phoenix has two players who are about to command serious money in free agency. Lexie Hull, who just showed why she's irreplaceable in big moments, and Sophie Cunningham, who brings a completely different skill set. The Mercury cannot afford to keep both at market value. That's just the reality of the WNBA salary structure. So what do you prioritize? The defensive playmaker who can single-handedly disrupt an opponent's best offensive weapon, or the offensive versatility and shooting that Sophie provides? Because after watching this unrivaled performance, the argument for Lexie just got a lot stronger. This wasn't some regular season game in July where effort level varies. This was a high-stakes 3-on-3 game where everyone was locked in, and Lexie still managed to put an elite guard in absolute hell.
Lexie Hull at Paige Bueckers in hell. And by the way, Paige Bueckers, every second that Lexie Hull was not on the floor, Paige Bueckers was absolutely cooking. Absolutely fucking cooking shoot something. Paige Bueckers didn't even have a bad game. But there was, especially at that start of that second half, the difference, as much as Chelsea Gray's magnet ball was the reason they won the game, offense always is more important than defense. But at the end of the day, like, the Lexie Hull just putting her in hell, forcing those turnovers, and it wasn't like they were timely turnovers, as in it was like, okay, grand turnover, and then we're gonna run in an open layup. Or I'm pretty sure this is a sequence of play that happened. Rose miss, Lexie Hull offensive rebound, Lexie Hull gets it to Azare Stevens 3. They inbound the ball, Lexie Hull steal. On the far end, they come down, they miss, the ball drops, Paige Bueckers is basically grabbing it, and Lexie Hull comes down and hits a Lexie Hull comes down, gets the steal, kicks it, hits Chelsea Gray 3. And it's like suddenly it's a 6-point swing of Lexie Hull's defensive possession after possession.
That sequence right there is what separates Lexie from every other guard defender in the WNBA. Rose misses a shot. Lexie gets the offensive rebound. She kicks it to Azura Stevens for a three-pointer. They inbound the ball. Lexie immediately gets a steal on the far end. They come back down, miss the initial shot. The ball is loose, Paige is going for it, and Lexie comes out of nowhere to secure it and kick out to Chelsea Gray for another 3. That's a 6-point swing created entirely by Lexie Hull's defensive presence and hustle play. Those are the possessions that don't show up properly in traditional box scores. Plus minus captures some of it, but even that doesn't tell the full story of how one player can completely shift momentum through sheer will and anticipation. The comparison to Jose Alvarado in the NBA is spot on. If Alvarado was 6'8" instead of 6 feet tall, that's basically what Lexie Hull is in the WNBA. The diving on loose balls, the deflections that don't become steals, the way she makes ball handlers uncomfortable just by existing in their peripheral vision. Sometimes that style doesn't work. Sometimes the diving leads to easy baskets, the other way. Sometimes the gambling doesn't pay off.
She is a defensive playmaker. There is no better guard defensive playmaker in the WNBA. I still think the Fever need to stop her. But as far as defensive playmakers, blocks, steals, the likes, you're not going to find, there's no one like Lexie Hull. There is nobody that does what Lexie Hull does. And again, whatever the value over the course of a season, and Lexie Hull's one of those players where it's like, because of the way she plays, borderline like fucking top. Imagine if Grand Theft Alvarado was like fucking 6'8". That's almost like the equivalent of Lexie Hull in the NBA. Like, it is because of, again, the games where the diving on loose balls, the hustle, sometimes it just doesn't work out. Sometimes it just does not work out. It just doesn't work. And in those games, the net negative that is Lexie Hull's offense can be an issue for your team. But in any game other than that, like, but in the core over an individual game, over the course of a season, I think her impact is greater on a game-by-game basis than it is if you look at basketball over the course of a season. So that's why, again, I don't know if I think the game-by-game value, the playoff value of Lexie Hull is greater than the total season value of Lexie Hull. But at the same time, like, there's no one like Lexie Hull. She's so hard to replace. She is so hard to replace. So yeah, anyway, Lexie Hull has Paige in hell. She had Paige in hell right here. And
now we need to address the fundamental tension in Lexie Hull's value proposition. Her impact on a game-by-game basis, especially in playoff scenarios, is elite. When you need one stop, when you need someone to make an offensive star uncomfortable, when you need those 50-50 balls to go your way, Lexie delivers at an all-defensive team level. But over the course of an 82-game season, 40 games in the WNBA, the cumulative value becomes harder to quantify. Offensive limitations add up. The games where the hustle doesn't quite translate, where the gambling on defense leads to easy baskets, those games exist too. So you have this weird situation where her playoff value might actually exceed her regular season value, which is the opposite of how most players work. Most stars are more valuable over a full season because their consistency compounds. Lexie is more valuable in individual high-leverage games because her impact is so situational and matchup dependent. That makes her incredibly difficult to price in free agency. What do you pay for someone who might be your third most important player in a playoff series, but your sixth or seventh most important player in February?
This is going to be, like, this was the first loss for the Breeze. As much as Chelsea Gray's magnet ball was unbelievable, I thought Lexie Hull was, I'm not going to say of equal importance, but of not far off equal importance.
Chelsea Gray finished with 37 points and deserves every bit of credit for willing Rose to victory. She was unconscious, hitting tough shot after tough shot, nearly breaking the Unrivaled scoring record. If she hits that final game winner, we're talking about one of the greatest individual performances in 3-on-3 basketball history. But here's the reality. Offense always gets the headlines. The player who scores 37 points will always get more attention than the player who holds an opponent to 4 assists and 5 turnovers through defensive pressure. That's just how basketball coverage works, and it's not entirely wrong. Offense is more important than defense in terms of winning games at the highest level. However, in this specific game, Against this specific opponent, Lexie Hall's defensive impact was nearly as important as Chelsea's offensive explosion. And that's not a slight against Chelsea. That's recognition that defense at the highest level, when executed with this kind of intensity and intelligence, can be a difference maker even in a game where someone scores 37 points. This was the first loss for Breeze in Unrivaled, the first time Paige Bueckers and her team got legitimately outplayed when it mattered most. And while Chelsea Gray's scoring will dominate the highlight reels, anyone who watched that game closely knows that Lexie Hall putting Paige in absolute hell was just as crucial to the outcome. Here's what this performance means for the larger conversation about Lexie's value. Every time a front office executive watches her play like this, the price goes up. Every time she makes an all-WNBA caliber guard look uncomfortable, someone convinces themselves they can build a contender around her defensive presence. And every time that happens, it becomes harder for Phoenix to keep her at a reasonable number. The Mercury are in a bind. They know what they have. They've seen Lexie do this for years now. They understand that there's no one else in the league who does what she does at her position. But they also know that paying her like a max player means sacrificing depth elsewhere, means potentially losing Sophie Cunningham, means building your roster around someone whose impact is harder to quantify than a traditional star. Think about the position this puts the front office in. If they let Lexie walk and she goes to another team and does this to them in a playoff series, the fan base will riot. If they pay her max money and the offensive limitations become a problem in the regular season, the same fan base will question the decision. There's no clean answer. What makes Lexie Hall so difficult to replace is the combination of defensive IQ, hustle, and sheer determination. You can find players who are better one-on-one defenders. You can find players who are better help defenders. You can find players who get more steals or blocks. But finding someone who does all of it, who makes opponents uncomfortable in every phase, who turns defense into offense through sheer will, that player doesn't exist on the open market. The Indiana Fever are reportedly looking for a defensive stop. They need someone who can take pressure off their offensive stars and make life difficult for opposing guards. Lexie Hall would be perfect for that role, but she's not a stopper in the traditional sense. She's a playmaker on defense. She creates turnovers. She generates fast breaks. She turns defense into offense. That's different from a lockdown defender, who simply prevents their assignment from scoring. Indiana needs both. Honestly, they need someone who can lock down an opponent's best player, and someone who can create defensive possessions that turn into easy offense. Lexie does the second part at an elite level. The first part is more matchup dependent, as we saw in this game, against Paige Bueckers, a crafty guard who relies on screens and IQ. Lexie was dominant. Against a different type of player, the results might vary. The broader question is whether teams are properly valuing defensive playmaking in the current WNBA landscape. The league is moving toward more offensive freedom, more spacing, more three-point shooting. In that environment, is a defensive playmaker who forces turnovers and creates transition opportunities more valuable or less valuable than in a slower, more methodical era? You could argue it both ways. On one hand, if everyone is shooting threes and spreading the floor, having someone who can disrupt passing lanes and create steals becomes more valuable because those turnovers lead to easy transition basket. On the other hand, if the game is more spaced out, the opportunities for those deflections and steals might decrease, because there's less congestion. What we saw in this Unrivaled game suggests the former. Even in a 3-on-3 setting with maximum spacing, Lexie Hall found ways to create chaos. She tipped passes, she recovered on rotations, she grabbed offensive rebounds in traffic. If she can do that in 3-on-3, she can definitely do it in 5-on-5 where there's more help and more opportunities for weak side rotation. The comparison to how teams value defensive specialists in the NBA is instructive. Players like Marcus Smart Jr. Holiday and Alex Caruso have all commanded significant money, despite offensive limitations, because teams recognize that elite defense at the guard position is rare and valuable. The difference is that the NBA has max contracts that are significantly higher, so teams have more flexibility to pay for defense without sacrificing everything else. In the WNBA, with a hard salary cap and much lower max contracts relative to the total cap, paying a defensive specialist like Lexie Hall can genuinely hamstring your roster construction. That's the economic reality that makes this decision so difficult for Phoenix. So where does this leave us? Lexie Hall just had one of the most impressive defensive performances in Unrivaled history. She made an elite offensive player look completely uncomfortable, hit the biggest shot of the game despite shooting poorly overall, and reminded everyone why she's so difficult to replace. But she also showed the limitations that make her such a tough evaluation. The offense was rough, the shooting was inconsistent, and there were moments where you could see why teams might hesitate to offer max money. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Lexie Hall is worth more than a role-player contract, but less than a max deal. She's a high-level starter who can be your third or fourth best player on a championship team. She's someone you absolutely want in a playoff series against an elite backcourt, but she's not someone you build your entire roster around. Phoenix needs to figure out what that's worth in real dollars. And other teams need to decide if they're willing to bet on Lexie's defensive impact being the missing piece for their championship puzzle. Because after this performance, the bidding war is about to get very real. One final thought. The way Paige Bueckers played when Lexie Hall was off the floor versus when she was on the floor is a perfect case study in matchup-dependent defense. Paige is an elite offensive player who's going to be a star in the WNBA for years. But even elite players have weaknesses, have matchups that give them trouble, have defenders who get in their head. Lexie Hall is that defender for crafty, screen-heavy guard. She's the nightmare matchup that makes them work twice as hard for half the results. And in a league where guard play is becoming increasingly important, where the ability to create offense in isolation and pick-and-roll situations is paramount, having someone who can neutralize that is incredibly valuable. So is Lexie Hall worth a max contract? That depends on what else you have on your roster, what your championship window looks like, and whether you believe her defensive impact can overcome her offensive limitations. But after watching her put Paige Bueckers in absolute hell for an entire Unrivaled game, it's a lot harder to argue she's not worth serious money. The question is just how serious that money should be.